After my parents passed away, my own brother kicked me out of our family home and left me standing in the freezing rain. The next morning at the will reading, he looked me dead in the eye and mocked me, saying he had made sure I got absolutely nothing. Then the estate lawyer pulled out one final sealed document. When he announced my actual net worth to the room, my brother literally fainted into his chair. But to understand how we got to that boardroom, I have to take you back to the exact moment he locked me out. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old, and I work as a payroll accountant for a local logistics firm. I am a sensible, quiet person who has spent my entire adult life making the numbers balance and ensuring everyone else is taken care of. 3 days ago, I stood in a graveyard and buried both of my parents in a double funeral. Today, I am standing on the front lawn of the only home I have known for the past decade, shivering in a torrential downpour, watching my older brother Preston destroy my life with a cordless drill. The rain is coming down in absolute sheets, soaking completely through the thin black mourning dress I have not had the energy to take off since the burial. The freezing water is matting my hair to my face and running down my spine, but I can barely feel the cold. All I can hear over the deafening sound of the rain hitting the concrete driveway is the high-pitched whine of Preston's power drill. I is standing on the covered porch, sheltered from the storm, wearing a pristine waterproof designer jacket. He is methodically unscrewing the brass deadbolt from the heavy oak front door. "Preston, what are you doing?" My voice comes out ragged, torn up from days of crying and exhaustion. He does not even pause the drill. He keeps his eyes focused on the screws, his jaw set in that arrogant, entitled line I have known since childhood. "I am changing the locks, Chloe." He says it so casually, as if he is telling me he is changing a light bulb. "You cannot change the locks." I take a step forward onto the bottom stair of the porch, the rain pouring off my shoulders. "I live here, Preston. My keys are inside. My purse is inside. Everything I own is inside that house." He finally stops the drill and looks down at me. His eyes are entirely devoid of empathy. "You lived here past tense." He corrects me, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom and Dad are gone. The free ride is over. I am the eldest son, and this house is legally mine now. I am just securing my property." The audacity of his words hits me harder than the freezing rain. The free ride. For my entire 20s, while my friends were building their careers, getting married and buying their first homes, I put my entire life on hold. I moved back into my childhood bedroom to provide round-the-clock care for our parents. When our mother developed early-onset dementia, it was me who stayed awake all night to make sure she did not wander out into the street. When our father's heart failure progressed, it was me who managed his dozen daily medications, drove him to every cardiology appointment, and lifted him out of the bathtub when he became too weak to stand. I sacrificed my youth, my dating life, and my career advancement to be their unpaid 24-hour nurse. I worked my accounting job remotely, typing payroll spreadsheets with one hand while holding my mother's shaking hand with the other. And where was Preston for those 10 years? He was busy being a serial entrepreneur in California, a title he gave himself to cover up the fact that he could not hold down a real job. He never visited. He never offered to relieve me for a single weekend so I could rest. The only time his name ever popped up on my father's caller ID was when one of his ridiculous business ventures went bankrupt. He was always calling to ask for seed money, an artisanal dog food delivery service, a cryptocurrency startup that never launched, a luxury watch rental app. Every single time he begged our father for cash, draining my parents' resources from 1,000 miles away while I was clipping grocery coupons just to afford Mom's adult diapers. "You think this was a free ride?" I scream over the sound of the storm, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. I wiped their tears. I bathed them. I held their hands while they took their last breaths. "You did not even show up to the hospital until the monitors went flat. You were living here rent-free for a decade, Chloe." Preston sneers, pointing the drill at me like a weapon. "Do not act like you are some kind of saint. You got free room and board because you could not hack it in the real world. Now that they are gone, you have to pack up and face reality." Before I can scream back at him, the heavy oak door swings open the rest of the way. Chelsea Preston's wife steps out onto the porch. She is wearing a cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks, holding a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and dragging a heavy-duty black trash bag with the other. Chelsea has always looked at me like I am a stain on the carpet. She comes from old money, the kind of woman who has never had to scrub a toilet or balance a checkbook in her life. She married Preston for his promised inheritance, and she has spent the last 5 years waiting impatiently for my parents to die so she could finally claim her prize. She drops the trash bag right at the edge of the porch. It hits the concrete with a heavy thud, and the cheap plastic tears open. My sensible accounting slacks, my faded cotton blouses and my worn-out shoes spill out onto the wet concrete, instantly soaking up the muddy rainwater pooling on the ground. Chelsea takes a slow sip of her coffee, looking down at my ruined clothes with utter disgust. "We are going to be listing the house very soon, Chloe," she says, her voice sweet and poisonous. "We simply cannot have your clutter everywhere. The real estate agent is coming tomorrow, and she says the guest room needs to be completely cleared out and staged as a home gym. It brings up the property value." The guest room. She is talking about my bedroom. The room where I slept with a baby monitor next to my pillow for 10 years, so I could hear if my father stopped breathing. I stare at my clothes floating in the muddy puddles. My chest heaves, fighting back a sob that threatens to choke me. I do not care about the clothes. They are cheap. They are replaceable. But the utter lack of humanity, the sheer cruelty of throwing my belongings into the rain just 3 days after we buried our parents is something I cannot comprehend. "Preston, please," I beg, wrapping my arms around myself as a violent shiver racks my body. The temperature is dropping and my lips are turning blue. "I will leave. I am not trying to fight you for the house right now. Just let me come inside for 5 minutes. Just let me get my winter coat from the hall closet. I am freezing." Preston turns his back to me and begins fitting the new deadbolt into the doorframe. The coat stays. "We are having an estate liquidator come in this weekend. We are donating all the excess clothing and furniture to charity for a massive tax write-off. My accountant says we need the deductions." "Your accountant?" "I am an accountant, you fool." I want to scream, but I am too cold. My teeth are chattering so hard I can barely form the words. "Please, Preston." I step up onto the porch, ignoring Chelsea's look of absolute revulsion as my wet shoes drip onto the dry wood. "If you will not give me my coat, just let me get Mom's ashes. They are sitting right there on the mantel in the living room. You do not even want them. Just let me take her." Preston stops. For the first time since I arrived, his eyes leave the deadbolt. He turns slowly and plants himself in the doorway wide enough to block the narrow opening with his shoulders. Behind him, through the warm amber light of the foyer, I can see the living room exactly as it looked the morning of the funeral. My mother's urn is still on the mantel. My father's is beside it. The framed family photograph between them is crooked because Chelsea moved it while measuring the wall for staging. For one irrational second, I think that if I can just step across the threshold and straighten that frame, the last 3 days might somehow become unreal. "The ashes stay with the house, Chloe," Preston says. His voice is low and final. "I am the head of this family now. I decide what happens to our parents' remains. Maybe I will scatter them in the ocean. Maybe I will leave them on the mantel until the house sells, but you do not get to make demands anymore." My eyes move past his shoulder, and that is when I see the wooden lockbox. It is sitting on the narrow foyer table beneath the mirror, exactly where my father kept it for as long as I can remember. The box is small enough to carry under one arm, made of dark wood worn pale along the corners from decades of handling. The brass latch is scratched. One hinge is slightly crooked. To Preston and Chelsea, it looks like junk, the kind of sentimental clutter an estate liquidator would toss into a donation pile without a second thought. But I know what that box means. My father used it whenever he wanted one place for the paper trail he considered too important to scatter through filing cabinets, copies, notes, account references, old property records, and the little handwritten reminders that helped me understand how his mind organized money. I had digitized what mattered years ago. The physical box was never the fortress. It was only the map that taught me how to build one. Still seeing Preston standing between me, and it ignites something deeper than anger. That box belongs to the years I spent at the kitchen table beside my father, learning how he saved every receipt and penciled every total in the margin. It belongs to nights when my mother was asleep, and he would tap the lid with one finger and tell me that numbers were only useful if you remembered the human beings behind them. I do not want Preston pawing through it, mocking it, or throwing it into a dumpster because it does not look expensive. "Then give me the lockbox," I say. Preston glances over his shoulder. "What lockbox?" "The wooden one on the foyer table." Chelsea follows his gaze and gives a short laugh. "That ugly thing I told you it should go in the trash." I take another step. "It is mine to sort through. Dad kept family papers in it." The change in Preston is immediate. The moment he hears the word papers, his casual cruelty sharpens into suspicion. He reaches into the foyer and snatches the lockbox off the table before I can move. He tucks it against his side like a football. "No," he says. "Preston, if Dad kept papers in here, then they are estate papers, estate property, my property. You do not even know what is inside." "Exactly." His smile returns, "which is why you are not touching it." He flips the brass latch with his thumb, but I can tell from the angle that the warped lid is sticking. He shakes the box once hears paper slide inside, and his eyes brighten with the greedy curiosity I know too well. Chelsea sets her coffee on the foyer table and leans toward him. "Maybe the old man kept account numbers in there." I almost laugh, but I do not. If they understood how much work it had taken to make the physical papers irrelevant, they would not be standing there congratulating themselves. For 2 years, every important document had been scanned, indexed, backed up, cross-referenced, and stored behind layers of authentication that Preston did not even know existed. He was hugging a wooden box to his chest because he thought possession meant control. That had always been his mistake. "Give it to me," I say one last time. Preston steps backward into the foyer. "You really do not understand your position, do you? You are not the accountant here. You are not the executor. You are not the decision-maker. You are the unpaid nurse who happened to sleep upstairs." The words strike exactly where he intends them to. For 10 years, I measured my days in medication alarms, grocery lists, blood pressure readings, payroll deadlines, laundry loads, and the quiet panic of listening for my mother's footsteps in the middle of the night. I learned to sleep lightly enough to hear my father cough from 2 rooms away. I learned which cardiology prescriptions made him dizzy, which foods my mother would still eat when dementia made everything unfamiliar, and how to finish a payroll reconciliation at 2 in the morning after helping both of them through a bad night. I did all of it while Preston called from California and explained why his latest business required just one more infusion of family money. Now he is reducing a decade of care to a job title he can spit at me. "I was their daughter," I say. "You were convenient," he replies. Something in my face must change because Chelsea stops smiling for half a second. I move toward the doorway. I do not lunge. I do not threaten him. I simply step up onto the porch and reach past him toward the lockbox. Preston reacts as if I am trying to rob him. He jerks the box behind his body and plants his free hand flat against my collarbone. "Do not come into my house. Move." He shoves me. It is not a warning push. He drives his arm forward hard enough to send my weight backward. My wet shoes slide on the slick porch boards. I grab for the railing and miss. My shoulder twists, my heel slips off the top step, and suddenly there is nothing beneath me. I hit the grass on my back and side with enough force to knock the air from my lungs. Mud splashes across the black morning dress I wore to bury our parents. One of my palms scrapes over gravel at the edge of the walkway, and a hot line of pain cuts through the cold. For several seconds I cannot breathe. Chelsea laughs. It is not loud. That somehow makes it worse. It is a soft, amused exhale from a woman standing inside a warm house with a cup of coffee, while I lie in freezing mud 3 days after my parents' funeral. Preston looks down at me with the lockbox still tucked under his arm. He does not offer a hand. He does not look shocked by what he has done. He only shakes his head. "Goodbye, Chloe. Hope you find a nice warm bridge to sleep under." I stare at him from the grass. The rain runs into my eyes. My scraped palm burns. Behind him, my parents' ashes sit 20 feet away. Under his arm is the wooden box he thinks contains the keys to everything. Chelsea picks up her coffee again. Then the heavy oak door closes. A second later, I hear the new deadbolt slide into place. I stay on the ground long enough to feel the meaning of that sound. It is not just a lock turning. It is Preston announcing what he thinks the family has become. He has the door, the house, the box, the cars in the garage, and whatever paper he can physically touch. Therefore, in his mind, he has won. For 10 years, I believed loyalty meant something by itself. I believed sacrifice created an obligation that decent people would recognize without being told. I thought that if I did the hard work quietly, if I kept our parents safe and kept the household running and never made my exhaustion anyone else's problem, my own family would understand what that cost me. Sitting in the mud, I finally understand the flaw in that belief. Loyalty has value only to people capable of valuing it. To Preston, my sacrifice was not proof of love. It was proof that I could be used. The tears stop before the rain does. I push myself upright. My knees shake, but I do not knock on the door again. I do not scream for my ashes. I do not ask for the lockbox. I walk to the torn trash bag and gather what I can. 2 blouses are soaked but salvageable. A pair of slacks is streaked with mud. 1 shoe has filled with rainwater. I wring out a sweater with both hands, fold it once, and place it on top of the pile. Through the front window, I catch a brief movement. Chelsea is watching me from behind the curtain. When she realizes I have seen her, she lets the fabric fall. That is the last look I give the house. My 12-year-old sedan is parked at the curb beneath a maple tree, stripped nearly bare by the storm. I open the trunk, place the wet clothes inside, and climb into the driver's seat. The interior smells faintly of old coffee and the peppermint candies my mother used to keep in the center console. I close the door and sit in silence. My hands are trembling on the steering wheel. At first I tell myself it is the cold. Then I realize the heater is already blowing warm air against my fingers, and the shaking has not stopped. It is adrenaline, grief, rage, and beneath all 3, something steadier. Control. Preston thinks changing a lock changed ownership of reality. He thinks the wooden box under his arm is valuable because it is physical. He thinks I am powerless because my purse, coat, and belongings are behind a door he controls. He has always confused visible things with important things: cars, watches, suits, houses. The performance of wealth mattered more to him than the structure beneath it. I learned the opposite from our father. I pull my phone from the pocket of my dress. The screen is wet, and I wipe it against the only dry patch of fabric I can find. I do not call Preston. I do not call Chelsea. I open a motel booking site, choose the cheapest clean room within driving distance of downtown, and reserve 1 night. Then I start the engine. As I drive away, the house disappears in the rearview mirror behind a sheet of rain. I expect panic to hit me at the first traffic light. It does not. I expect to feel homeless. Instead, I feel as if a curtain has finally been pulled away. Preston has shown me exactly what he is going to do with every advantage he thinks he has. That certainty is useful. The motel sits beside a 6-lane highway behind a faded sign that buzzes in the wet evening. My room is on the 2nd floor. The carpet is thin, the heater rattles, and the desk is made of cheap particle board with one corner swollen from old water damage. I carry my damp clothes inside in a plastic laundry bag the clerk gives me, lock the door, and stand for a moment in the center of the room. This is the moment Preston imagined when he told me to enjoy being homeless. He pictured me collapsing on a motel bed with my face in my hands. I do sit on the bed, but only long enough to take off my wet shoes. Then I unzip my tote bag. My laptop is dry. I set it on the desk, connect it to the motel Wi-Fi through the security tools I have used for the last 2 years, and open the encrypted server, where I keep the digital records for Oak and Iron Holdings. A login screen appears. I enter the first password, confirm the second factor on my phone, and wait while the folders load. There they are: formation documents, property records, executed transfers, corporate statements, scanned signatures, the operating agreement, the commercial land file, the records I had copied and indexed long before Preston ever thought about changing a deadbolt. I lean back in the cheap desk chair and look at the glowing screen. Preston has the wooden lockbox. I have the digital keys. The distinction would be almost funny if the day had not hurt so much. I open the folder containing the most recent corporate summary and review the document list once, not because I doubt my work, but because numbers calm me. Every date has a source. Every transfer has supporting paperwork. Every corporate action has a record. For 2 years, I built the structure patiently, while Preston lived as if inheritance were a future credit card waiting to be activated. Now he is inside the family house searching a wooden box. I am in a cheap motel, looking at the legal structure that actually matters. He thinks the house is a gold mine. He does not know it is a trap, and I am not going to warn him before he steps into it. The notification chime of my banking application broke the heavy silence of the motel room. I pulled my attention away from the secure server and opened a new tab on my web browser. It was time to pay for the double funeral. The invoice from Oakwood Memorial Gardens sat on the cheap particle board desk next to my laptop. It was a thick piece of cream-colored paper detailing the final costs for burying the 2 people who gave me life. $18,450. I typed my routing number into the payment portal. My hands did not shake. I opened my cell phone and looked at the text message I had sent Preston 3 days ago. The message asked him to cover exactly half of the burial expenses. His reply consisted of exactly 2 cruel sentences. "I am liquidating my assets into new ventures right now. You lived in their house rent-free for a decade, so consider this your back rent." I stared at his message on the glowing screen. I did not type a response. I did not call him to beg. I simply set the phone face down on the desk and authorized the full payment from my own personal savings account. The confirmation screen flashed green. The money was gone. I closed the browser tab. The rain continued to smash against the single window of the motel room. The violent sound of the storm outside masked the rattling hum of the heating unit. I closed my eyes and listened to the water hitting the glass. The rhythmic drumming instantly pulled my memory backward. It sounded exactly like the freezing rain that fell 2 years ago on the absolute worst night of my life. The night my father finally saw Preston for the parasite he truly was. 2 years ago. It was a Tuesday evening in late November. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the family home balancing my mother's checkbook while she slept in the bedroom. My father had been complaining of chest pain all afternoon. He waved it off as heartburn. He was a proud man who worked 40 years in middle management at a manufacturing plant, and he absolutely hated doctors. I was typing numbers into a spreadsheet when I heard a heavy, terrifying thud from the living room. I dropped my pen and ran down the hallway. My father was lying on his side on the hardwood floor near the fireplace. His face was an unnatural shade of gray. His hands violently clutched the fabric of his button-down shirt right over his heart. His breathing was incredibly shallow and ragged, making a horrible wet sound with every inhale. I dropped to my knees beside him. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed emergency services. The operator told me an ambulance was exactly 4 minutes away. I held my father's hand. His skin was freezing cold. His eyes were wide with absolute panic. He tried to speak to me, but the words would not form. I kept telling him to hold on, promising him that help was coming. The paramedics burst through the front door minutes later. They pushed past me, loaded him onto a stretcher, and rolled him out into the freezing rain. I grabbed my purse, locked the front door, and got into my car. I followed the ambulance to the local general hospital, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. As soon as I parked in the emergency room lot, I pulled out my phone to call my brother. Preston was living in California at the time. I dialed his number. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. I walked into the bright, chaotic emergency room waiting area and dialed a 3rd time. My father was currently being rushed into emergency surgery for a massive cardiac event, and I needed my brother to answer the phone. On the 4th try, Preston finally picked up. He did not say hello. He yelled my name over a tremendous amount of background noise. The sound of clinking glasses, loud jazz music, and dozens of people laughing echoed through the small speaker. "What do you want, Chloe?" His voice was laced with pure irritation. "I am in the middle of a major networking event at the country club." I pressed the phone hard against my ear to hear him over the noise. "Preston, Dad just had a massive heart attack. They are taking him into emergency surgery right now. You need to get on a plane. The hospital says his condition is extremely critical." The jazz music played loudly through the phone. I waited for the panic in his voice. I waited for him to ask for the flight details. I waited for my older brother to act like a son. "Chloe, you are overreacting." He said the words smoothly, completely devoid of emotion. "He is an old man. They go to the hospital all the time. I have 3 potential investors at my table right now for my new tech startup. If I walk away, I lose the seed money." I stood perfectly still in the middle of the emergency room. A nurse walked past me, pushing a medical cart. I could not comprehend what I was hearing. "Preston, our father, might not survive the night. You need to come home." I heard him sigh loudly, a sound of absolute boredom. "Look, keep me updated on his status. I will call you tomorrow when this mixer is over. Do not call this number again tonight. I am turning off my phone." The line went dead. He hung up on me. He turned off his phone to drink expensive cocktails, while the man who raised him was having his chest cut open. The surgery took 6 hours. I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room the entire time, drinking awful coffee from a vending machine, staring at the muted television on the wall. When the surgeon finally came out, he looked completely exhausted. He told me my father survived the operation, but his heart was permanently severely damaged. The doctor explained that my father would never fully recover. His heart failure was progressive. We were looking at a few years at best, requiring constant care and management. 2 days later, my father was finally moved from the intensive care unit to a standard private recovery room. I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair next to his bed. The room smelled like rubbing alcohol and stale hospital food. Monitors beeped in a steady, rhythmic cadence. Intravenous tubes ran from plastic bags into the back of his bruised hands. My father slowly opened his eyes. He looked incredibly small. The vibrant, stubborn man I knew had been reduced to a fragile shell overnight. He turned his head slowly against the thin hospital pillow and looked around the empty room. He looked at the door. He looked at the empty chair in the corner. Then he looked at me. "Where is Preston?" His voice was a raspy whisper, dry and weak. I froze. I had spent the last 48 hours trying to invent a believable excuse. I wanted to protect my father from the truth. I opened my mouth to tell him that Preston could not get a flight or that there was a massive storm on the coast. But my father raised his hand an inch off the mattress, stopping me. "Do not lie to me, Chloe." He stared right into my eyes. His gaze was sharp, cutting straight through the heavy medication fog. "Where is your brother?" I swallowed hard. The truth tasted like ash in my mouth. "I called him from the emergency room the night you collapsed. I told him you were in surgery. He was at a country club mixer in California. He said he was talking to investors and could not leave. He told me not to call back and turned off his phone. I have not heard from him since." My father did not cry. He did not shout. He closed his eyes and let his head sink back into the pillow. The heart monitor beeped in the quiet room. I watched a single profound realization wash over his face. It was the devastating look of a parent finally accepting that their child is exactly who they feared they were. For 30 years, my father had made excuses for Preston. He paid for his failed business ventures. He covered his bad debts. He always told me that Preston was just finding his way, that Preston just needed one more chance to succeed. But lying in that hospital bed facing his own mortality, the ultimate truth finally broke through the denial. Preston was not finding his way. Preston was just waiting for him to die. My father opened his eyes. The warmth was completely gone from his expression. He looked at me with a cold, terrifying clarity. "Chloe, bring me my brown leather briefcase. The one from the bottom drawer of my desk at home. I want it here by tomorrow morning." I nodded, not questioning the sudden shift in his tone. I drove home that night, retrieved the heavy leather briefcase, and brought it back to the hospital the next morning. The physical toll of the surgery was painfully obvious in the daylight. My father could barely lift his arms. I had to position the rolling tray table directly over his lap. I popped the brass latches. They echoed loudly in the sterile room. The inside of the briefcase was an absolute disaster. It was stuffed with messy financial documents, old bank statements, loose property deeds, and tax returns dating back 10 years. "Pull all of it out." My father commanded, his breathing heavy from the effort of speaking. "Spread it on the table." I emptied the briefcase. Papers covered the entire tray. There were statements from joint checking accounts, life insurance policies, and the original deed to the commercial real estate plot my parents had purchased 30 years ago. My father looked in the mountain of paper, then looked at me. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man recovering from open heart surgery. "Preston will drain everything." He spoke with absolute chilling certainty. "If I die tomorrow, your brother will swoop in, manipulate the probate process, and drain every single penny of this family wealth to fund his pathetic lifestyle. He will sell the commercial lot to the first developer who offers him a quick check. He will evict you from the house. He will leave your mother in a state-run facility. I know what you do for a living, Chloe. I know you are a brilliant accountant. I know you understand corporate structures better than any lawyer in this town." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want me to do, Dad? I want you to protect our family from your brother." He released my wrist and tapped his trembling finger against the commercial property deed. "This land is worth millions. The city is expanding the highway right next to it. A commercial developer approached me 3 months ago, offering $4.5 million for it. I turned them down because I wanted to hold it for your future. Preston does not know the developer called. Preston thinks it is a toxic dirt lot. If it goes through standard probate, Preston will fight you for it. He will force a sale and squander the cash in 6 months. I want you to use your accounting skills to quietly restructure all of our assets. I want you to build a fortress that Preston cannot break into." My hands hovered over the messy stack of documents. "Dad, what you are asking for requires forming new corporate entities. It requires moving assets out of your name entirely. It means stripping the standard estate bare before you even pass away. The probate court will look for the assets. The estate lawyers will dig. My father smiled a thin, ruthless smile I had never seen before. They cannot dig up what does not belong to me anymore. A living transfer to a corporate entity bypasses probate entirely. I am giving you complete authorization. Form a holding company. Transfer the commercial land into it. Make yourself the sole managing member. Take the cash from the high-yield accounts and bury it in corporate trusts that the probate court cannot touch. Leave the house and the primary checking accounts in my name as a decoy. Let Preston think he is inheriting the kingdom. But I want the real wealth locked away behind a door only you have the key to. I looked at the fragile man in the hospital bed. He was asking me to legally rewrite our family history. He was asking me to execute a massive secret financial operation right under my brother's nose. I looked at the commercial deed. I looked at my father's determined eyes. I will do it. I promised him right there in the sterile hospital room. I will build the structure. I will protect everything. He nodded once, a sharp movement of absolute trust. Start today, he ordered softly. I sat back in the vinyl hospital chair and pulled my laptop from my bag. I did not wait to go home. I opened a spreadsheet right there next to his bed and began cataloging the chaotic pile of documents. I spent the next 8 hours typing in account numbers, property identification codes, and tax basis values. My father watched me work. His breathing labored, but his eyes completely focused. Every time a nurse came into the room to check his vitals, I would casually close the laptop screen and slide the paperwork back into the leather briefcase. The moment the door clicked shut, I would pull it all back out. I was no longer just the unpaid nurse. I was the architect of my family's financial survival. I drafted the articles of organization right there, using the terrible wireless connection of the hospital. I chose the name Oak and Iron Holdings because my father always loved the massive oak tree in our front yard, and because I needed the structure to be as unbreakable as iron. Over the next 2 years, while I bathed my mother and managed my father's heart medications, I spent every single night executing this secret agreement. I hired a private corporate attorney using my own money to ensure every single transfer was legally bulletproof. We executed quitclaim deeds. We drafted complex operating agreements. We moved the liquid capital through a series of legal, heavily documented corporate assignments. I filed everything with the state using a registered agent, so my name would never appear on public municipal searches. Preston never suspected a single thing. He continued to call from California, demanding seed money for his ridiculous ventures. And every time he called, my father would play the part of the struggling parent. My father would tell Preston that cash was tight, that the medical bills were mounting, all while knowing that millions of dollars were being quietly secured behind the impenetrable walls of Oak and Iron Holdings. I bore the absolute cost of this loyalty in total silence, setting the perfect trap. The memory of my father's hospital room ended as abruptly as it had begun. I was back in the motel with the rain ticking against the window and the secure server glowing on my laptop. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the folder containing the Oak and Iron records. 2 years of signatures, filing statements, and disciplined silence sat in front of me. Then my phone vibrated so hard against the cheap desk that it rattled the funeral invoice. The message was from Preston. Send me the username and password for Mom and Dad's joint checking account. I am taking control of the estate tonight. Do not make this difficult. A second message arrived before I finished reading the first. And do not touch any of the money, the house. The accounts and everything in them are mine now. If you transfer $1, I will report you. I read both messages twice. The threat itself did not surprise me. The timing did. He had thrown me into the rain less than an hour earlier, and already he was trying to get into the bank accounts. No question about whether I was safe. No question about the funeral bill. No mention of our parents except as an ownership problem he believed he had already solved. I placed the phone beside the laptop and opened the account archive. As a payroll accountant, I have spent years learning that financial stories rarely hide in one dramatic transaction. They hide in repetition, a charge that appears every month, a transfer that always follows a phone call, a balance that declines in small, regular bites until the person looking at the statement becomes accustomed to seeing less. Fraud pressure and bad decisions often look ordinary one line at a time. The pattern becomes visible only when you stop reading the transactions as separate events. I had reviewed my parents' finances throughout their illnesses because they needed help paying bills and tracking medical expenses. After my father's heart attack, I reviewed them even more carefully. But there was one set of records I had deliberately kept separate from the oak and iron files, the household accounts, and the debt tied to the house. Those were the assets my father wanted left in the ordinary estate. They were the decoy Preston was supposed to chase. I downloaded the most recent statements and placed them side by side on the screen. The primary checking account was nearly empty. That fact was not new, but seeing the final balance after paying the funeral made the emptiness feel stark. Years ago, the account had carried enough cash to absorb emergencies without discussion. By the time my parents died, the cushion was gone. Medical costs had taken part of it. Ordinary household expenses had taken part of it. But the most damaging pressure had come from Preston's demands. I scrolled backward month by month, transfers to cover one of his failing ventures, payments connected to the lifestyle he maintained in California, money sent after he insisted he was days away from securing investors, more money sent after he claimed a temporary cash shortage would destroy a business that was supposedly on the edge of success. My father had told me some of it. The statements showed the rest. Then I opened the home equity file. The figure sat at the top of the loan statement in black type, $300,000. 1 year earlier, Preston had pushed our father into taking out a home equity line of credit against the Elm Street house. The house my parents had spent decades paying for had become collateral for Preston's appetite. The proceeds did not create a new family asset. They disappeared into his lifestyle and the businesses he used to justify that lifestyle. Luxury cars, expensive appearances, the constant cost of looking successful enough to convince the next person that success was already real. I remembered the weeks surrounding the loan. My father had been weaker then. The heart attack had changed the limits of his body, and caring for my mother consumed what energy he had left. Preston called constantly. Sometimes I heard my father's side of the conversations from the kitchen. He would say no. Then Preston would call again. My father would say he could not keep financing him. Preston would change tactics. He would talk about opportunity, obligation, family, and shame. He would remind our father that an eldest son was supposed to carry the family name. He would imply that refusing to help meant refusing to believe in him. Eventually, the pressure worked. My father signed. The night he admitted it to me, he could barely look me in the eye. He said he had made one final mistake because he was tired of fighting with his son. I did not lecture him. He was already living with the consequence. I simply added the HELOC documents to my records and began tracking the debt. Now I opened the payment history. The balance combined with the existing mortgage was more than the house could realistically support. Whatever Preston imagined the property was worth, the equity he expected to harvest was gone. The house looked valuable from the curb. On paper, it was underwater. That was the brutal truth he did not understand. My phone buzzed again. "Did you get my message?" Then another. "I need the bank login now. The real estate agent wants proof of funds before she starts spending money on staging." I stared at the words proof of funds. That was Preston in 4 syllables. He wanted the appearance of liquidity before he had even read the will. I was already promising money. He had not inherited against property. He had not valued correctly using accounts he had not examined. I typed a response. "The accounts will be handled through the estate process. I will not give you my credentials." His answer came almost immediately. "They are not your credentials. They are family accounts. I am the heir." I did not respond. Instead, I opened the loan documents again and reviewed the lien language. I already knew what it said. The HELOC was secured by the house. Preston could inherit the property if that was what the standard will directed, but the lien would not vanish because our parents were gone. The obligation remained attached to the collateral. The house and the debt were traveling together, whether he understood that or not. That was the first half of the trap. The second half was oak and iron. Months earlier, when the credit union began restructuring part of its loan portfolio, the HELOC had become available for purchase with a package of other secured debt. I had acted through Oak and Iron Holdings and completed the legal purchase of the loan. The company did not erase the debt. It simply stepped into the creditor's position. Every payment right, every security interest, and every enforcement right attached to that HELOC now belonged to the LLC. Preston thought the debt would die with our parents. Instead, it had survived them and changed hands. I opened the acquisition file and checked it line by line. The assignment was complete. The transfer of servicing rights was documented. The lien record matched the property file. The corporate account used for the purchase matched the ledger. Nothing depended on a verbal promise. Nothing depended on my brother admitting what he had done. The paperwork carried the story on its own. I leaned back and pressed my fingertips together. For 2 years, I had been careful not to confuse anger with strategy. My father did not ask me to destroy Preston. He asked me to protect the family assets from him. That distinction mattered. Oak and Iron existed before the eviction. The transfer of the commercial property existed before the funeral. The HELOC existed because Preston pressured our father into creating it. The lien purchase existed because the debt was a risk to the one major asset Preston was certain he wanted. I had not created his consequences. I had documented them. Another message appeared. I know there is more money than you are telling me. Dad always kept things from me. If you hid anything, I will find it. For the first time that evening, I smiled. I was probably sitting in the family living room with the wooden lockbox open on the coffee table, expecting a secret account number to fall into his lap. He could search every folded paper inside it. He could turn the box upside down. He could hold each page against the light if he wanted. What mattered was no longer there. I returned to the bank statements. I built a clean chronology for myself. The home equity line had been opened 1 year ago. The proceeds had been consumed. The secured balance remained. The primary accounts had dwindled. The commercial land had been moved into Oak and Iron 2 years earlier. The land had later been sold by the LLC for $4.5 million. The sale proceeds had never entered the probate estate. The LLC owned the HELOC debt, and I owned 100% of the LLC. The numbers formed a straight line. That was important because tomorrow Preston would try to bend reality with volume. He would speak loudly. He would invoke birth order. He would talk about being the eldest son, the businessman, the rightful heir. Chelsea would reinforce him because she believed the same fiction. If I entered that room reacting emotionally to every insult, the truth would become just another argument. So I did what I always did when a set of books became messy. I reconciled it. I created a summary showing the estate assets Preston expected to receive the house, the classic cars, and the primary checking accounts. Beside the house, I noted the secured debt. Beside the checking accounts, I noted the actual balance. In a separate section, I listed the Oak and Iron assets and ownership. I attached the commercial land transfer, the $4.5 million sale record, the LLC operating agreement, and the HELOC assignment. Then I read it from top to bottom without skipping a line. The contrast was almost cruel in its simplicity. Preston believed the house represented wealth. The ledger said debt. He believed the checking account represented cash. The statement said nearly empty. He believed the wooden lockbox represented hidden control. The corporate record said control had already moved. He believed being the eldest son represented ownership. The operating agreement said 100% of Oak and Iron belonged to me. My phone rang. I watched Preston's name pulse on the screen until the call went to voicemail. He called again. I let it ring. On the third attempt, I answered, not because he deserved a conversation, but because I wanted to hear exactly how confident he still was. Finally, he snapped. What is wrong with you? Nothing. I told you to send the bank login. And I told you the accounts will be handled through the estate process. He gave a short, contemptuous laugh. You really think your little accounting job makes you a lawyer now? No. Then stop acting important. Tomorrow is a formality. Dad left the serious assets to me. Once the paperwork is signed, I will deal with the house and the accounts. Any debts attached to Mom and Dad are estate problems. Those get settled and disappear. That is what probate is for. There it was. I looked at the HELOC statement on my screen. Is that what you believe? I asked. It is how money works, Chloe. I almost admired the certainty. Behind his voice, I could hear movement in the house, a drawer opening, paper rustling. He was searching. Did you find what you wanted in the lockbox? I asked. The line went quiet. Then his tone hardened. There is nothing in that box but old papers. Then I guess it was not worth throwing me into the rain for. You threw yourself into the rain when you refused to accept reality. I looked at the digital files on my laptop and felt the last trace of doubt leave me. Good night, Preston. Do not hang up on me. I ended the call. He immediately sent another message, but I turned the phone face down. The motel heater clicked on. Warm air pushed across the floor. Outside, the storm was finally weakening. The rain that had sounded violent an hour earlier softened into a steady hiss against the glass. I printed the clean summary I had prepared, then printed the supporting pages I would need Mr. Abernathy to see. I did not print everything. The full archive was too large, and the point was not to overwhelm him. The point was to establish the chain clearly enough that a careful estate lawyer could verify each step ownership transfer sale debt lie in control. I stacked the documents in order and placed them in my tote bag. The will reading was scheduled for the next morning, but I no longer intended to wait until then to reveal the structure to Mr. Abernathy. He had drafted the standard estate documents. He needed to understand, before Preston entered the room, why the apparent inheritance and the actual financial reality were two completely different things. I looked one last time at Preston's messages. He wanted passwords. He wanted keys. He wanted the house. He wanted the physical lockbox. He wanted every symbol of control he could see. I had something better. I had the ledger. And by the time he understood what it said, it would be far too late to pretend the numbers belonged to him. I closed the laptop screen and immediately picked up my car keys from the cheap motel desk. I did not have time to sit in that damp room and wait for the official probate process to begin. The will reading was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but my most important meeting was happening right now. I walked out into the cold air and got back into my sedan. I drove straight toward the downtown legal district. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, washing the city streets in a gray light. Mr. Abernathy had been my parents' estate lawyer for 30 years. He operated out of a massive brick building near the courthouse. He was an old, sharp, no-nonsense attorney who did not tolerate fools. He liked order. He liked paperwork filed in triplicate. He liked the law to be predictable. I was about to walk into his office and completely rewrite the financial history of the family he thought he knew so well. I parked in the visitor garage and rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The reception area was heavily decorated in dark wood and green leather. The receptionist recognized me immediately. She stood up from her desk and offered her condolences with a soft voice. I thanked her politely and asked if Mr. Abernathy was available for an urgent consultation. She checked his calendar, noted a cancellation, and nodded. 5 minutes later, I was walking through the heavy mahogany doors of his corner office. The walls were lined with thick legal volumes and framed certificates. The air smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Mr. Abernathy sat behind a massive oak desk. He took off his wire-rimmed reading glasses and looked at me with deep sympathy. "Chloe," he said softly, standing up to gesture toward a leather guest chair, "I am so terribly sorry for your loss. Losing both parents, so close together, is a tragedy no child should have to bear. We are scheduled to read the will tomorrow with your brother and his wife. Is there a specific reason you needed to see me today?" I sat down in the leather chair. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my heavy black laptop. I placed it directly on the center of his pristine desk. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy, I need to show you something before Preston arrives tomorrow. I need to show you the actual estate." He frowned. His bushy white eyebrows pulled together in confusion. He sat back down heavily. "The actual estate. Chloe, I drafted your parents' will myself. I have the inventory of the assets listed for the standard estate in my filing cabinet behind me. I know what your parents instructed me to administer through probate." I opened the laptop screen. I typed in my password and opened the secure server. I turned the computer around so it faced him. "You have the inventory they intended to remain in the standard estate," I said quietly. "You have the decoy Preston expects to see." Mr. Abernathy leaned forward. He put his reading glasses back on. He peered at the glowing screen. "What exactly am I looking at here?" "You are looking at Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC, I explained. I kept my voice perfectly level. "For the past 2 years, I have been working as the sole managing member of this corporate entity. My father authorized the creation of this holding company while he was recovering from open-heart surgery. He signed the initial formation documents from his hospital bed." The old lawyer stared at the screen. He scrolled down the master spreadsheet using the trackpad. His eyes widened as he processed the numbers. He clicked on a subfolder containing bank statements and real estate deeds. "Chloe, this is a massive corporate structure. It holds millions of dollars in liquid capital. Where did this capital come from?" "It came from the toxic dirt lot my parents bought 30 years ago," I told him. "The commercial plot out by the new highway expansion." Mr. Abernathy shook his head slowly. "I know that plot. Your father told me it was essentially worthless. He said he was just holding on to it for a minor tax deduction. He explicitly told me not to factor it into the primary estate valuation. He lied to you to protect it from my brother, I said. 3 months before my father had his massive heart attack, a major commercial developer offered him $4.5 million for that exact plot of land. The city zoning board had approved a massive retail center right next to it. My father knew that if he died with that asset in his standard estate, Preston would force a sale through the probate court. Preston would demand his half of the money and squander it on failed business ventures within 6 months. Preston has bankrupted 3 startups in the last 5 years. My father could not let him destroy the family legacy, so my father asked me to build a fortress. I reached across the desk and pointed to a specific digital document on the screen. We legally transferred the deed of the commercial land into Oak and Iron Holdings 2 years ago. I executed the sale to the commercial developer entirely under the LLC. The $4.5 million bypassed probate completely. The money is sitting in high-yield corporate accounts right now. And as you can see by the operating agreement, I am the 100% owner of the LLC. Mr. Abernathy read the legal filings word by word. He checked the state registration numbers. He verified the digital signatures and the notary stamps. He clicked through the assignment of membership interests. He was a veteran attorney who had seen decades of vicious family disputes, but he was completely speechless. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the laptop, then looked at me. Mr. Abernathy did not immediately accept my conclusion. That was one of the reasons my father had trusted him for so many years. He did not confuse confidence with proof. He turned the laptop back toward himself and began moving through the files from the beginning, checking them in the same order. He would have checked an unfamiliar estate brought in by a stranger. First came the formation record for Oak and Iron Holdings, then the operating agreement, then the deed transferring the commercial parcel into the company, then the later sale agreement with the developer. He compared execution dates, notarizations, account statements, and the assignment, showing that my father had transferred the membership interests while he was alive and competent to sign. I sat quietly while he worked. I did not need him to admire what I had built. I needed him to understand exactly what existed before Preston walked into this office the next morning and tried to claim it. Every few minutes, Mr. Abernathy stopped and looked at me over the top of his glasses. The questions were precise. Had my father signed voluntarily? Yes. Had the private corporate attorney documented his authorization? Yes. Had the commercial parcel been transferred before the developer purchased it? Yes. Had any of the sale proceeds entered my parents' personal checking accounts? No. The sale proceeds had remained inside the company structure. Had Preston ever held a membership interest, management right, or signing authority? No. Not for one day, not for $1, not for one document. The more answers he confirmed, the quieter he became. I watched him open the scanned copy of the original deed. My father's signature sat at the bottom in the same firm handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, tax returns, and permission slips when I was a child. Seeing it there hurt more than I expected. For 2 years, that signature had been part of a structure I managed with professional discipline. In that office, less than a week after both of my parents were gone, it became my father's voice again. He had known exactly what he was doing. He had not been trying to humiliate Preston. He had been trying to prevent a predictable disaster. Mr. Abernathy tapped one date with the capped end of his pen. The land was already outside the probate estate before the sale. Yes. And the company, not your father, personally received the purchase price. Yes. And by the time of the sale, you already held 100% of the membership interest. Yes. He sat back a fraction. Then the will cannot transfer an asset your father no longer owned. That was the point. For the first time since I entered his office, he stopped looking surprised. His expression became analytical. He opened the standard estate file and placed it beside the corporate records. The contrast was almost cruel in its simplicity. On one side sat the assets Preston knew about the house, the cars, and the ordinary bank accounts. On the other side sat the company he had never bothered to imagine, because he had never bothered to understand the family finances. My father had not hidden wealth with a magic trick. He had changed ownership while he was alive, documented the change, and let Preston's assumptions do the rest. What did your father tell you about the purpose of leaving the house in the ordinary estate? Mr. Abernathy asked. That Preston would chase whatever looked valuable on the surface, I said. Dad believed he would demand the house before he understood the debt attached to it. He wanted the real family capital protected first. Mr. Abernathy looked again at the ordinary checking balances. They were almost bare. Then he looked at the corporate statement showing the proceeds from the land. He exhaled slowly. I understand the architecture now. I felt something in my shoulders loosen. I had carried the entire structure in silence for 2 years, always afraid that one missed filing, one inconsistent date, or one careless disclosure could destroy what my father had trusted me to protect. Hearing the estate lawyer describe it as an architecture did not make me proud. It made me tired. The work had never felt like revenge while my parents were alive. It had felt like maintenance, one more medicine schedule, one more bill, one more signature, one more night making sure the future did not collapse while everyone else slept. Mr. Abernathy closed one document and opened another. Tomorrow Preston is going to hear the standard will and believe his assumptions have been confirmed. I know. Then he is going to hear this. I know. He studied me for a long moment. And you intend to let him make that discovery in the room? Yes, not because I needed a performance, not because I needed to see him suffer, but because Preston had spent years treating every warning as weakness. If I explained the truth privately, he would call it a bluff. If I sent him documents, he would accuse me of fabricating them. He needed to hear the ownership structure from the estate lawyer while the certified records were sitting on the table in front of him. He needed the facts to arrive in a form he could not bully dismiss or shout over. That was the first moment I understood that tomorrow would not be an argument between siblings. It would be a reconciliation of accounts. Chloe, he said slowly. His voice carried a tone of absolute disbelief. This is legally airtight. You used a registered agent in Delaware to maintain total anonymity. You completely stripped the primary estate of its most valuable liquid asset. You moved millions of dollars out of your parents' names while they were still alive and aware. I nodded. I did not break eye contact. Everything was handled by a private corporate attorney. I paid for his services using my own savings. My name does not appear on any public municipal searches related to my parents' property. Preston has absolutely no idea this money exists. Preston believes the family wealth is entirely tied up in the house and the primary checking accounts. The lawyer leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He folded his hands across his stomach. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and profound respect. Does your brother truly believe he is inheriting a massive fortune tomorrow? He believes he is walking away with everything, I replied. He locked me out of the family home this morning. He changed the deadbolt while I was standing on the porch in the freezing rain. He threw a trash bag full of my clothes onto the wet grass and told me I was nothing but an unpaid nurse. He thinks because he is the eldest son, he gets the keys to the kingdom. He thinks he is a ruthless businessman who just outsmarted his naive little sister. Mr. Abernathy frowned deeply. He opened a thick manila folder on his desk. He flipped through several pages of thick legal paper. The standard will dictates that the family home, the vintage cars in the garage, and the primary checking accounts go directly to Preston. That was your father's strict instruction. Your father was very clear about leaving those specific assets to your brother. But Chloe, the primary checking accounts are nearly empty. They barely have enough funds to cover the upcoming property taxes. I know, I said calmly. I paid for the double funeral out of my own personal savings account this morning because the checking accounts were drained. Preston refused to contribute a single dollar. And the house, the lawyer continued tapping his pen against the desk. The house is a beautiful property. It is situated in a highly desirable neighborhood. But your parents took out a massive home equity line of credit a year ago, $300,000 against the equity of the home. I tried to advise your father against it. I begged him not to leverage the property, but he insisted. He said he needed the cash for specialized medical expenses that insurance refused to cover. He did not need it for medical expenses, I corrected him. I kept my voice firm. Preston secretly coerced our father into taking out that loan. Preston needed the money to fund his lavish lifestyle and his leased luxury cars in California. He convinced our father that his new tech startup was days away from a massive payout. My father was too physically weak and emotionally exhausted to fight him anymore. Preston drained that $300,000 in 8 months. Preston thinks that debt dies with our parents. He thinks he can just inherit the house tomorrow, list it with a real estate agent by the afternoon, and pocket a huge pile of cash. Mr. Abernathy stared at me. His legal mind was processing the implications at lightning speed. If Preston inherits the house, he inherits the debt attached to it. The mortgage and the massive line of credit severely exceed the current market value of the property. The house is completely underwater. Preston is not inheriting wealth tomorrow. He is inheriting a catastrophic financial disaster. I smiled. A cold, surgical smile. Yes, he is. The lawyer looked at the laptop screen again. The bright blue light illuminated his weathered face. And you. You walk away with a corporate entity holding millions in liquid cash. You walk away completely debt-free. I walk away with exactly what my father wanted me to have, I said. I walk away with the future he built for me. The future I protected while I was bathing my mother and sorting my father's daily medications. I paid the cost of loyalty in total silence. I gave up my 20s to care for them. Preston gave them nothing but stress and financial ruin. Mr. Abernathy closed his manila folder. He looked at me for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy. I have been practicing law for 40 years, Chloe. I have seen families tear each other apart over silver spoons and old photo albums. I have seen children manipulate their parents on their deathbeds. But I have never seen a financial defense strategy executed with such absolute ruthless precision. You built a perfect trap. I did not want to do this, I told him honestly. I did not want to spend my nights drafting corporate structures and moving money through corporate accounts. I wanted to be a normal daughter. I wanted a brother who cared about our parents more than he cared about his next networking event at the country club. But Preston forced my hand. He refused to answer the phone when our father had a heart attack. He refused to help pay for the funeral. He locked me out of my own home this morning. He thinks he has already won. What do you want me to do tomorrow? Mr. Abernathy asked. His voice was completely professional now. He was ready to execute the plan. I want you to conduct the will reading exactly as planned, I instructed. I leaned forward and placed my hands flat on his desk. I want you to read the standard will first. I want you to give Preston the house. I want you to give him the empty checking accounts and the vintage cars. I want him to believe he has taken everything from me. I want him to gloat. I want his wife to sit there and smile at me. And then the lawyer prompted. And then I said, I want you to open a new section. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a heavy red sealed envelope. I had prepared it myself at the motel. It contained the printed legal summary of Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC, along with the certified bank statements. I handed the envelope across the desk. I want you to announce the LLC. I want you to announce my true net worth to the room. Mr. Abernathy took the heavy envelope. He weighed it in his hands. He ran his thumb over the red wax seal. He looked back at me. Your brother is going to lose his mind, he said quietly. He is going to accuse you of fraud. He is going to demand that I liquidate this holding company immediately and divide the assets. Let him demand whatever he wants, I said. The corporate structure is ironclad. He has no legal standing to challenge a living transfer that occurred 2 years ago under the strict guidance of corporate counsel. The money is mine. The LLC is mine. The lawyer nodded slowly. A small grim smile appeared on his face. You are a very formidable woman, Chloe. Your father was right to trust you with this burden. I stood up from the leather chair. I picked up my laptop and slid it securely back into my tote bag. I am not formidable, Mr. Abernathy. I am just a payroll accountant who knows how to balance the books. My brother spent his entire life taking from this family. Tomorrow the ledger finally balances. I will see you tomorrow morning at 9, the lawyer said. He stood up and shook my hand. His grip was firm and reassuring. I will have the documents ready. I will follow your instructions to the letter. I walked out of the mahogany doors and back into the rainy street. The storm had finally broken. The dark clouds were clearing, revealing a bright, cold blue sky over the city. I got back into my 12-year-old sedan. I did not turn the key immediately. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the tall glass buildings of the downtown district. My hands were perfectly steady. For 10 years, I had made myself small. I had accepted the role of the quiet, obedient daughter. I had let Preston mock my job and my life. I had let Chelsea roll her eyes at my cheap clothes. I had swallowed my anger and my pride because I believed that keeping the peace was the most important thing a daughter could do. But peace built on exploitation is not peace at all. It is just silent surrender. Tomorrow the silence would end forever. Preston thought he was the ruthless businessman. I thought his expensive suits and his confident attitude made him untouchable. He had absolutely no idea that his quiet little sister had just engineered the greatest financial trap of his life. He was about to walk into that boardroom expecting a coronation. Instead, he was going to walk into a financial execution. I started the car engine and drove back to the cheap motel. I laid out the modest clothes I would wear to the lawyer's office the next morning, choosing the same kind of practical slacks and plain blouse Preston had mocked for years. I wanted no costume and no performance. I wanted to look exactly like the sister he believed he had already defeated. Then I sat on the edge of the motel bed and reviewed the LLC operating agreement, the land sale records, and the HELOC assignment one final time. Every signature matched, every date matched, every document led cleanly to the next. The trap was not emotion, it was structure. All I had to do now was let Preston walk into the room and tell the truth about himself. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Abernathy & Associates law firm exactly 10 minutes before 9 o'clock. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Brenda, looked up from her dual computer monitors and offered a warm, professional smile. I did not wear my black morning dress today. Instead, I wore a pair of sensible gray slacks from a discount department store, a plain white button-down blouse, and flat black shoes that were still slightly damp from the morning drizzle outside. I walked to the front desk and quietly announced my arrival. Brenda nodded, her eyes filled with the same gentle sympathy I had seen the day before, and instructed me to take a seat in the waiting area. I walked over to a high-backed leather sofa positioned against the far wall and sat down. I placed my worn leather tote bag carefully on my lap, resting both hands on top of the smooth material. The waiting room was an exercise in quiet intimidation. Dark mahogany panels lined the walls. Thick, expensive Persian rugs covered the polished hardwood floors. A massive antique grandfather clock stood in the corner, its heavy brass pendulum swinging back and forth with a rhythmic heavy tick that echoed in the silent room. The air smelled of lemon furniture polish, roasted coffee, and old paper. I did not pull out my cellular phone to distract myself. I did not pick up any of the glossy financial magazines fanned out perfectly across the glass coffee table in front of me. I simply sat perfectly still, listening to the grandfather clock, feeling the steady, calm rhythm of my own heart beating in my chest. I focused entirely on controlling my breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, presence to project absolute defeat. I needed to look like a woman who had already surrendered to her fate. The contrast of my cheap clothes against the expensive leather sofa was exactly the visual narrative my brother needed to see. The heavy glass doors at the front of the office swung open with a violent, sudden force. The quiet sanctuary of the waiting room shattered instantly. Preston and Chelsea marched through the entrance, bringing the loud, chaotic noise of the busy city street directly into the dignified space. They did not walk, they paraded. Preston was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal Italian suit that fit his shoulders perfectly, paired with a silk tie that undoubtedly cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase in one hand and held a steaming cup of artisan coffee in the other. Chelsea walked half a step behind him, wrapped in a long camel-colored cashmere trench coat. She wore tall leather boots with distinctive red soles that clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. A massive diamond ring flashed under the recessed lighting every time she adjusted the designer handbag slung over her forearm. They brought an immediate suffocating arrogance into the room, sucking all the oxygen out of the space. Preston marched straight up to the reception desk. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how Brenda was doing. He simply leaned forward, placing his free hand flat on the polished wood counter. "Preston Dixon," he announced loudly, his voice carrying an aggressive edge of total entitlement. "We are here for the 9 o'clock will reading with Mr. Abernathy. Tell him we have arrived and we are in a massive hurry. I have a team of luxury property contractors meeting me at my new estate in exactly 2 hours, and I do not have time to sit around waiting." Brenda blinked, clearly taken aback by his abrasive tone. "Good morning, Mr. Dixon. I will let Mr. Abernathy know you are here. He is just finishing up some final paperwork for the estate transfer." Chelsea sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes and leaning against the edge of the reception desk. "This entire probate process is an absolute annoyance," she complained to her husband, completely ignoring the receptionist. "It is absolutely ridiculous that we have to drive all the way downtown and sit in this stuffy office just to sign a few pieces of paper for a house we already own. Your father should have handled all of these minor legal details before he passed away. It is so inconsiderate to leave this administrative burden on our shoulders when you have real businesses to run." Preston nodded in agreement, taking a sip of his coffee. "I completely agree, Chelsea. The legal system is a massive nuisance designed to slow down wealthy people. But we will sign the standard forms, grab the physical property deed, and walk out of here. The real estate agent already has the listing draft prepared. We just need to give her the green light this afternoon." Preston turned away from the reception desk, scanning the waiting room for a place to sit. His eyes swept past the coffee table, past the potted ferns, and finally landed directly on me. He stopped completely in his tracks. The arrogant, self-satisfied expression on his face morphed instantly into a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. He lowered his coffee cup slowly. Chelsea followed his gaze. She let out a short, sharp gasp of exaggerated shock when she saw me sitting quietly on the leather sofa. "Oh, my word," Chelsea muttered, bringing a manicured hand up to touch her pearl necklace. "What on earth is she doing here? I thought you told her she was completely cut off." Preston did not answer his wife. He began walking slowly across the Persian rug toward me. His expensive leather shoes made no sound on the thick wool, but his posture was aggressive, like a predator cornering a wounded animal. Chelsea followed closely behind him, her red-soled boots clicking against the exposed floorboards near the edge of the rug. They stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me, towering over my seated figure. I did not look down. I did not shrink back into the cushions. I kept my hands resting gently on my worn leather tote bag, and I tilted my head up to look my older brother directly in the eyes. "What are you doing here?" Chloe Preston demanded. His voice was not loud, but it was dripping with venom. "The estate lawyer called the primary beneficiaries. That means me. I am the eldest son. I am the heir. You have absolutely no business being in this building." I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping every ounce of emotion from my tone. "I am an immediate family member, Preston. Mr. Abernathy notified both surviving children and asked us to attend the reading. I am here because I was asked to be here." Preston let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed through the quiet waiting room. "Asked to be here. Do not try to hide behind office formalities, Chloe. We both know exactly why you dragged yourself down here. You are hoping for a handout. You are hoping the old man felt guilty at the last minute and left you a little pity check." Chelsea crossed her arms over her cashmere coat and looked down at my cheap gray slacks with absolute revulsion. "It is honestly pathetic, Preston," she said, speaking about me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into a fine dining restaurant. "Look at her clothes. She is completely desperate. She probably thinks Mr. Abernathy is going to hand her an envelope full of cash so she can finally afford to buy a wardrobe that did not come from a discount bin. We told you yesterday, Chloe, you are not getting a single dime from this estate. We are liquidating the family home. We are selling the vintage cars in the garage. We are taking the primary checking accounts. You were just the unpaid nurse and your services are no longer required." I listened to her cruel, biting words. I heard the sheer mockery in her voice. A year ago, a month ago, even a week ago, comments like that would have crushed my spirit. I would have lowered my eyes. I would have felt the familiar hot sting of tears welling up in the corners of my eyes. I would have believed that their wealth and their designer clothes somehow made them better than me, smarter than me, more deserving of respect than me. But sitting there on that leather sofa, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, surgical calm. I looked at Chelsea's flashing diamond ring purchased with credit card debt. I looked at Preston's custom Italian suit leased on the promise of a future payout that was never going to happen. They were completely hollow. They were financial ghosts parading around in expensive costumes, totally unaware that they were already bankrupt. Preston leaned forward. He placed his hands flat on his knees, bending down until his face was mere inches from mine. I could smell the bitter espresso on his breath and the strong, overpowering scent of his designer cologne. He wanted to intimidate me. He wanted to see me physically cower away from him. He wanted to break me down right here in the waiting room before we even stepped foot inside the boardroom. He lowered his voice to a cruel, vicious whisper, ensuring that only I could hear his final threat over the ticking of the grandfather clock. "Hope you enjoy being homeless because I made sure you get nothing." He smiled, a dark, twisted smirk that pulled at the corners of his mouth. He waited for my reaction. He waited for the tears. He waited for me to beg him for mercy, to ask him for a small loan, to plead with him to let me stay in my childhood bedroom for just one more month. I remained perfectly, chillingly silent. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not shift my weight on the leather sofa. I simply stared him dead in the eye. I focused all of my energy, all of my 10 years of suppressed anger, all of my grief over my parents, and all of my knowledge about the massive financial trap waiting for him directly into my gaze. I looked through him. I looked at him with the cold, absolute certainty of an executioner watching a condemned man brag about his future plans. The seconds ticked by on the heavy grandfather clock. Tick, tick, tick. Preston's smirk began to falter. The absolute lack of fear in my eyes unnerved him. He expected a victim, but he was staring at a wall of solid ice. He shifted his weight slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the heavy, suffocating silence stretching between us. He opened his mouth to say something else, to hurl another insult to regain his sense of power. "Mr. Abernathy is ready for you now." Brenda's voice cut through the tension like a sharp knife. She was standing next to her desk, holding open a thick set of double mahogany doors leading into the main boardroom. Preston stood up quickly, breaking our eye contact. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive Italian suit and cleared his throat, trying to regain his arrogant composure. He grabbed Chelsea by the elbow and guided her toward the double doors, refusing to look back at me. I picked up my worn leather tote bag. I stood up from the sofa, smoothing the fabric of my cheap gray slacks. I walked slowly across the Persian rug, following them into the boardroom. I did not say a single word. My silence was not surrender. It was the calm before the total destruction of his life. Mr. Abernathy closed the heavy double doors behind us with a solid click that echoed through the massive boardroom. The space was cavernous and intimidating, designed specifically to make people feel small. A long, polished mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by 12 high-backed leather chairs. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, bright rectangles across the dark wood. I walked toward the far end of the table and pulled out a chair. The leather creaked loudly in the quiet room as I sat down. I placed my worn tote bag on the floor next to my feet and folded my hands neatly on the table in front of me. Preston and Chelsea did not sit down quietly. They treated the formal boardroom like a hotel lounge they had rented for a private party. Preston tossed his sleek black leather briefcase onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding a few inches across the polished mahogany. He pulled out a chair for Chelsea, guiding her into it with an exaggerated display of gentlemanly care before dropping into the seat directly next to her. They positioned themselves directly across from me. Preston leaned back, stretching his legs out under the table, and crossed his arms over his custom-tailored charcoal suit. He looked around the room with a deep sigh of profound boredom, checking the heavy gold watch on his left wrist. Mr. Abernathy walked slowly to the head of the table. He carried a thick manila folder and a silver pitcher of ice water. He set the pitcher down, took a crystal glass from a small tray, and poured himself a glass of water. The sound of the ice clinking against the crystal was the only noise in the room. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He set the glass down exactly on a leather coaster. He was an old man who had conducted hundreds of these meetings, and he refused to be rushed by arrogant heirs. He opened the manila folder and carefully extracted a stack of thick legal paper bound by a blue cover sheet. He reached into his breast pocket, retrieved his wire-rimmed reading glasses, and slid them onto his face. "Let us begin," Mr. Abernathy said. His voice was gravelly and authoritative, demanding absolute attention. "We are gathered here today to execute the final will and testament of your late parents. My office will read the operative provisions in full, so there is no confusion about what your parents directed. I ask that you hold questions until I have finished." Preston shifted in his chair. He picked up a silver pen from the center of the table and began tapping it against his leather briefcase. Tap, tap, tap. "With all due respect," Mr. Abernathy Preston interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "We all know exactly what this document says. My father and I discussed this extensively before he passed. Can we just skip the legal preamble and get straight to the asset distribution? My time is incredibly valuable today." Mr. Abernathy lowered the thick stack of papers. He looked over the rim of his glasses directly at my brother. The tapping of the silver pen stopped. "I do not skip sections of a legal document," Mr. Dixon, the lawyer, said firmly. "I run a meticulous practice, Mr. Dixon. You will sit quietly and listen until I have finished the provisions that control this estate. If your time is too valuable to respect your parents' final wishes, you are welcome to wait in the lobby until we require your signature." Preston tightened his jaw. A flash of genuine anger crossed his face, but he forced a tight, artificial smile. He set the silver pen down on the table. "Of course, Mr. Abernathy. Please proceed. I just want to ensure we handle this efficiently." Mr. Abernathy lifted the papers again. He cleared his throat and began to read. I, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament revoking all prior wills and codicils. He read through the standard legal declarations, the burial instructions, and the payment of outstanding medical debts. The process was agonizingly slow. Every word was enunciated with perfect clarity. I watched Chelsea pull her cellular phone from her designer handbag. She placed it flat on the table and began silently scrolling through a social media application, completely ignoring the solemnity of the room. She was merely waiting for her payday. "We now come to the distribution of real property," Mr. Abernathy announced. The tone of his voice shifted, signaling the beginning of the financial allocations. Preston sat up completely straight. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He looked directly at me, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He wanted to make sure I watched him take everything. Regarding the primary family residence located at Elm Street, Mr. Abernathy read aloud, tracing the line of text with his index finger. "It is my strict instruction and final wish that this property, including all land, physical structures, and immediate fixtures, be bequeathed entirely and solely to my eldest son, Preston Dixon. He is to assume full legal ownership of the property immediately upon the execution of this estate." Chelsea let out a soft, breathy laugh. She reached under the table and patted Preston on the leg. Preston did not break eye contact with me. He nodded his head slowly, savoring the victory. He had the house. He had the key. He had the physical structure he believed held the core of the family wealth. Regarding the automotive assets held by the estate, the lawyer continued, turning to the second page. "My father owned 2 classic cars. He spent 10 years restoring a vintage Mustang and an old Chevrolet pickup truck. They were his pride and joy. Parked carefully in the detached garage behind the family home, I bequeathed the entirety of my automotive collection, specifically the vintage Mustang and the Chevrolet truck, directly to my son, Preston Dixon." Preston leaned closer to Chelsea and whispered loudly enough for the sound to carry across the quiet table. "We can call that specialty auction house in Chicago tomorrow morning. Those cars alone will easily fetch $80,000. Chelsea nodded enthusiastically, her diamond ring flashing in the sunlight as she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. I kept my hands folded on the table. I did not blink. I stared back at Preston with a perfectly blank expression. I controlled my breathing, ensuring my chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. "We now address the liquid financial assets," Mr. Abernathy said. He took another slow sip of water from his crystal glass before reading the next paragraph. "I direct that the balances of all my primary checking and savings accounts held at the local municipal credit union be transferred entirely to my son, Preston Dixon. He is to assume control of these funds to manage the transition of the physical estate." Preston let out a loud, heavy exhale of total satisfaction. He reached out and grabbed Chelsea by the hand, squeezing her fingers tightly. He had swept the board, the house, the cars, the bank accounts. The Standard will gave him absolutely everything of apparent value. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He practically vibrated with arrogant energy, completely convinced he had secured a massive fortune. Mr. Abernathy turned to the final page of the Standard document. "There is one final provision in this primary document," he stated. His eyes flicked briefly toward me before returning to the text. "Regarding my personal sentimental items, I bequeath the complete collection of family photo albums, my personal journals, and the decorative wooden lockbox from the front foyer to my daughter, Chloe Dixon. It is my hope she preserves these memories." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Mr. Abernathy lowered the paper and placed it flat on the mahogany table. He removed his reading glasses and folded them carefully. "That concludes the reading of the primary assets," the lawyer said. Chelsea clapped her hands together. The sound was sharp, loud, and incredibly inappropriate for a will reading. It sounded exactly like applause at a theater performance. "Oh, that is just wonderful," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. She picked up her designer handbag and placed it on her lap, clearly preparing to leave. "It is so nice to see things handled properly. Your parents really understood how much you needed this capital for your new business ventures, Preston." Preston ignored his wife. He kept his eyes locked entirely on me. He wanted to witness my devastation. He wanted to see me break down and cry. He wanted me to beg. I sat exactly as I had for the past 20 minutes. My cheap gray slacks were pressed against the leather chair. My worn tote bag remained on the floor. I did not shed a single tear. I did not open my mouth to protest. I let the absolute weight of the Standard will settle into the room. Preston laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. He picked up his silver pen again and pointed it directly at my face across the wide table. "Photo albums," Preston mocked, shaking his head in disbelief. "You spent 10 years washing their dirty laundry, managing their ridiculous pill organizers, and sacrificing your entire social life. And what did you get for all that free labor? You got a stack of old photo albums and a broken wooden box full of garbage. I told you yesterday, Chloe. I told you that you were nothing but a squatter in my house. You played the loyal, pathetic daughter for a decade, and you walked away with absolutely nothing." I did not respond. I looked at the silver pen pointed at my face. I looked at his expensive custom Italian suit. I looked at the smug, satisfied expression on his face. He was drowning in his own arrogance, completely blind to the reality of his financial situation. Preston turned his attention away from me and looked at Mr. Abernathy. He grabbed the handle of his sleek black leather briefcase and pulled it toward his chest. He stood up from his leather chair, buttoning the center button of his suit jacket with a practiced, arrogant motion. "Can we wrap this up?" Preston demanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He looked down at the old lawyer with complete disdain. "I need you to hand over the physical property deed right now. I have a real estate agent meeting me at my new house in an hour to list it. She already has a team of professional stagers waiting in the driveway. We are putting it on the market by tomorrow morning, and I need the title documents in my hand before I walk out of this building." Chelsea stood up next to him. She smoothed the front of her cashmere coat and offered the lawyer a brilliant artificial smile. "Yes, please, Mr. Abernathy. We have an incredibly busy afternoon ahead of us. We need to contact the auto auction house, and Preston has a meeting with a new venture capital investor at 3 o'clock. We really must be going." They stood there at the side of the mahogany table looking down at me, and the lawyer fully believing they had just conquered the world. It looked like Preston had won everything. It looked like he had successfully stripped me of my family legacy, my home, and my financial security. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded, bragging about the view, and I sat there in my cheap clothes, remaining perfectly chillingly silent, waiting for the final push. For several seconds, nobody moved. The grandfather clock in the reception area was too far away to hear clearly through the closed doors, but the office still seemed to carry a faint mechanical rhythm, as if time itself were marking Preston's last few moments of certainty. He held out his hand for the deed, palm up, impatient. Chelsea had already slipped her phone back into her handbag. In their minds, the meeting was finished. I looked down at the family photo albums Mr. Abernathy had placed near my elbow. Their worn covers were nothing like the polished leather briefcase Preston carried. One corner of the oldest album had been repaired with clear tape. I remembered my mother smoothing that same tape down with her thumb years ago because she refused to replace anything that still worked. There were no millions inside those pages, no account numbers, no title documents, just birthdays, school photographs, Christmas mornings, my father's garden plans, and ordinary evidence of a life Preston now dismissed as worthless. The Standard Will had also assigned me the small wooden lockbox from the foyer. Preston had taken it from me at the house because he assumed anything I wanted must be valuable. Its meaning was almost embarrassingly simple: old paper copies, handwritten notes, and family records whose important information I had long since digitized. He had fought me for the box because he believed possession was the same thing as control. That mistake was about to repeat itself on a much larger scale. Preston noticed me looking at the albums and smiled. "Enjoy the memories," he said. "I prefer assets." Chelsea gave a small laugh. I ran my fingertips once over the edge of the top album and said nothing. That silence irritated him more than an insult would have. He had been waiting all morning for me to break. He wanted tears when the house went to him. He wanted anger when the cars went to him. He wanted me to accuse our father of favoritism so he could sit back and enjoy the role of victorious eldest son. Every time I denied him that reaction, his smile tightened. "Seriously, Chloe," he said, "you can stop pretending you are above this. You lost." I met his eyes. He mistook my calm for humiliation because he had never learned the difference between silence and surrender. Mr. Abernathy gathered the pages of the Standard Will into one neat stack. He aligned their edges against the table with 2 soft taps. That tiny sound changed the room. Preston's extended hand lowered slightly. Chelsea glanced toward the lawyer. The celebration had lasted only a few minutes, but they had already spent the inheritance in their heads. The house listed, the cars sold, the bank balances transferred, my life reduced to a box of photographs. Mr. Abernathy placed the standard will to his left. Preston frowned. The deed. The lawyer did not reach for it. Instead, he rested both hands on the desk and looked first at Preston, then at Chelsea, then at me. His expression was not dramatic. That made it more unsettling. He looked like a man who was about to correct a number on a balance sheet. "Mr. Dixon," he said, "the provisions I have just read dispose only of property that remained in your parents' probate estate at the time of death." Preston's eyebrows drew together. "You just told me what I inherited." "I did." "Then give it to me. I will complete the required transfer documents, but the reading is not finished." Chelsea shifted in her chair. What could possibly be left? I watched Preston's fingers curl around the handle of his briefcase. He had heard the sentence, but he had not yet understood the danger inside it. The standard will had given him exactly what he expected. That was why the next document would hurt. It would not take something away from him. It would reveal that the fortune he thought had been taken from me had never been his to receive. I sat back and let the silence do what I had spent 10 years refusing to do for myself, take up space. Mr. Abernathy did not reach for the property deed lying on the polished mahogany table. He completely ignored Preston standing there with his jacket buttoned and his hand outstretched. Instead, the old lawyer slowly opened the bottom right drawer of his heavy wooden desk. The metal tracks glided silently in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope made of premium cream-colored paper. It was sealed shut with a large pool of dark red wax, stamped with the official crest of the Abernathy & Associates law firm. He placed the heavy envelope dead center on the table right next to his crystal glass of ice water. "What is that?" Preston demanded. His arrogant smile slipped just a fraction, replaced by a look of profound annoyance. "I told you I do not have time for any more sentimental garbage. If that is a letter from our mother or another list of childhood memories, you can give it to Chloe. She loves living in the past. I need the title to the house right now." Mr. Abernathy took off his wire-rimmed reading glasses. He folded the arms with 2 distinct clicks and laid them carefully on top of his original manila folder. He looked up at my brother with an expression of absolute unyielding professional authority. "You are going to sit back down in your chair, Mr. Dixon." The lawyer said, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register that commanded immediate obedience. "You are going to remain silent, and you are going to listen to me. There is one final section to this estate execution, and it supersedes everything I have read to you over the past 20 minutes. Preston bristled. He looked at Chelsea, who was currently frowning at the red wax seal. He let out a loud, dramatic sigh and unbuttoned his custom Italian suit jacket. He dropped heavily back into his leather chair, crossing his arms tight over his chest. "Make it fast," Preston muttered. "The staging crew charges by the hour." I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. I did not shift my weight. I watched Mr. Abernathy slide a silver letter opener out from under his desk calendar. He inserted the sharp metal tip under the flap of the heavy envelope. The red wax seal cracked with a sharp, loud snap that echoed off the boardroom walls. He withdrew a dense stack of legal documents. These papers did not have the standard blue cover sheet of a typical last will and testament. They were bound with thick brass brackets and stamped with the official seal of the State Corporate Registry. Mr. Abernathy put his glasses back on. He cleared his throat and began to read the final document. "This section details the corporate structuring and asset transfer initiated by your late father 2 years prior to his passing." He read aloud, tracing the dense paragraphs with his index finger. "We are now addressing the formation, the operational guidelines, and the absolute ownership structure of Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC. Preston let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oak and Iron Holdings." He repeated the name mockingly. "What is this, some kind of shell company Dad set up to avoid paying taxes on his pension?" "Dad did not own a business. I was a middle manager at a manufacturing plant. You are wasting my time with this corporate nonsense." The lawyer did not look up from the page. "Oak and Iron Holdings is a fully registered and legally binding limited liability company formed for the express purpose of holding and managing commercial real estate assets. 2 years ago, your father legally transferred the deed of his undeveloped commercial plot out on the highway expansion corridor directly into this corporate entity." Chelsea rolled her eyes and leaned back in her chair. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she complained loudly. "That toxic dirt lot. Your father told us about that place years ago, Preston. He said the city was going to fine him for weeds and soil erosion. It is completely worthless. Why are we talking about a patch of dirt when we have the family estate to liquidate today? Mr. Abernathy finally looked up. He stared directly at Chelsea, his expression completely blank. "It is not a patch of dirt, Mrs. Dixon." The lawyer corrected her, his voice devoid of any emotion. "It is a prime commercial real estate parcel located at the exact intersection of the new municipal retail zoning project. 3 months before your father underwent his emergency open-heart surgery, he was approached by a major regional developer." Preston stopped tapping his foot. He uncrossed his arms. A deep, unsettling silence fell over his side of the table as his arrogant posture began to slowly dissolve. "A developer," Preston repeated. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "What developer? Why did he never mention a developer to me? I am the eldest son. I am the businessman of this family. If someone wanted to buy that land, I should have been the one negotiating the contract. How much did they offer him for that toxic lot? 50,000. 100,000. Because whatever it is, I want that cash liquidated and transferred to my primary accounts by tomorrow morning." I watched the vein throb in Preston's neck. He was still trying to act like he was in control. He still believed he was the master of the board, demanding his rightful tribute. "The developer did not offer $100,000, Mr. Dixon," the lawyer said calmly. He turned to the second page of the thick document. "The developer offered $4.5 million in liquid capital for the immediate transfer of the land rights." Chelsea gasped loudly. She dropped her cellular phone directly onto the polished mahogany table. It hit the wood with a loud clatter, but she did not even look down to retrieve it. Her eyes were completely wide, staring at the lawyer in absolute shock. $4.5 million. She repeated, her voice breathless and trembling with sudden greed. "Preston, your father had $4.5 million hidden away this whole time." Preston grabbed the edges of the table. His knuckles turned bright white as he leaned forward. He looked like a man who had just struck gold in his own backyard. The smug, vicious smirk returned to his face, wider and more arrogant than ever before. He looked across the table at me, his eyes gleaming with sheer malice. "I knew it," Preston said, his voice shaking with excitement. "I knew the old man was holding out on me. I was hiding the real money so you could not drain it to pay for your cheap lifestyle, Chloe. He knew I was the only one who could handle a sum like that." Preston turned back to the lawyer. He slapped his hand flat on the table. "Cancel the real estate agent meeting, Chelsea. We do not need to stage the house today. Mr. Abernathy, I demand you wire those funds into my personal checking account immediately. Under the terms of the standard, will you just read, 'All checking and savings accounts go directly to me. I am the sole heir to the financial assets. Transfer the $4.5 million right now.'" Mr. Abernathy took a slow, deliberate sip from his crystal glass of water. He set it down exactly on the leather coaster. "I cannot do that, Mr. Dixon," the lawyer said quietly. Preston's face turned a violent shade of red. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You just said I get the accounts. You just read the legal document. I am the primary beneficiary. You are the estate lawyer, so execute the estate and give me my money. The $4.5 million is not in your father's estate," Mr. Abernathy explained, entirely unbothered by Preston's screaming. "That is the entire purpose of Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC. The sale of the commercial land was not conducted by your father as a private citizen. The sale was executed by the corporate entity. Therefore, the proceeds of that sale bypassed probate court entirely. The money was never deposited into your parents' primary checking accounts. It never touched the standard estate." Chelsea grabbed Preston by the arm. Her perfectly manicured fingernails dug into the fabric of his Italian suit. "What is he talking about, Preston? Where is the money? If it is not in the checking account, where is it? The capital is currently held in a series of high-yield corporate accounts managed exclusively by the LLC." Mr. Abernathy read from the third page of the document. "The funds are legally shielded, fully audited, and completely inaccessible to anyone outside of the authorized corporate management structure." Preston stood up from his chair. He paced one step to the left, then one step to the right, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. He was trying to process the legal mechanics, trying to find the loophole he believed he was smart enough to exploit. "Fine," Preston said, pointing a shaking finger at the lawyer. "Fine. If the money is locked inside this ridiculous shell company, then just give me the company. Hand over the operating agreement. I will dissolve the LLC myself this afternoon, liquidate the trusts, and take my inheritance. As the eldest son, I automatically inherit my father's business holdings. Give me the management papers right now." Mr. Abernathy did not hand over the papers. He looked at Preston with a mixture of professional detachment and profound pity. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the final page of the corporate registry document. "You cannot dissolve the company, Mr. Dixon, because you do not own it. You have absolutely no legal standing, no membership interest, and no voting rights within Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC." Preston froze. He stood perfectly still next to his leather chair. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. "What do you mean I do not own it? Who owns it? Who is the managing member?" Mr. Abernathy placed his hands flat on the documents. "2 years ago, while recovering in the hospital, your father executed a living transfer. He assigned 100% of the membership interests and complete executive control of Oak and Iron Holdings to a single managing director. He did this specifically to ensure the capital would be protected from outside interference." "Who?" Preston demanded. His voice was no longer a confident yell. It was a panicked, desperate croak. "Who owns the company?" I sat back in my leather chair. I unclasped my hands and let them rest comfortably on the armrests. I looked directly at my brother. I did not smile. I simply let him look into my eyes as the absolute reality of his situation closed in around him like a vice. Mr. Abernathy turned the final page so it faced Preston. He pointed to the bold, notarized signature at the bottom of the operating agreement. "The sole managing member and 100% owner of Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC, is your sister, Chloe Dixon." The lawyer announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Chelsea let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting frantically between me and the legal documents on the table. Preston stopped breathing. I watched his chest freeze. He stared at the lawyer, then he slowly turned his head to look at me. The arrogant businessman in the custom Italian suit vanished entirely. As the sole owner of the corporate entity, Mr. Abernathy continued, twisting the knife with professional precision. "Your sister retains absolute control over the $4.5 million in liquid assets. Factoring in the current compound interest of the corporate trusts, Chloe Dixon's true net worth is currently valued at $4.8 million, all of which is legally cleared, fully taxed, and entirely hers." All the color drained from Preston's face. The ruddy, angry red vanished, replaced by a sickly, terrifying pale gray. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords refused to function. He looked at my cheap gray slacks. He looked at my worn leather tote bag sitting on the floor. He looked at the woman he had locked out in the freezing rain the day before. The woman he had thrown garbage at, the woman he had called a pathetic, unpaid nurse. $4.8 million, Preston whispered to himself. The words barely escaped his lips. He tried to take a step toward me. He lifted his right foot, but his leg simply gave out beneath him. The sheer psychological shock of realizing he had been completely outmaneuvered, that the fortune he thought he owned belonged entirely to the sister he despised, severed the connection between his brain and his body. Preston stumbled backward. His expensive leather shoes slipped on the polished floorboards. He flailed his arms wildly, knocking his sleek black briefcase off the table. It hit the ground, spilling meaningless decoy papers everywhere. He collapsed backward, his knees buckling completely, and fainted dead away into his high-backed leather chair. His head lolled to the side, his eyes rolling back in his skull. Chelsea screamed his name. She dropped to her knees beside his chair, shaking his shoulder frantically, screaming for someone to call an ambulance. I did not move. I did not offer to help. I sat in my chair, smoothing the fabric of my sensible slacks, watching the man who had tormented me for a decade finally break under the weight of his own arrogance. Preston groaned a low, pathetic sound that rattled in his throat. He blinked his eyes open, staring blankly at the mahogany ceiling of the boardroom. Chelsea was kneeling beside his leather chair, her manicured hands gripping his shoulders, shaking him hard enough to make his head wobble. She was shouting his name, her voice shrill and panicked, completely stripped of her previous upper-class refinement. He scrambled backward, pushing her hands away, his expensive Italian leather shoes scraping frantically against the hardwood floor. He hauled himself up using the edge of the heavy table. His custom-tailored suit jacket was wrinkled, his silk tie pulled askew. He looked wildly around the room, his chest heaving until his bloodshot eyes locked onto Mr. Abernathy. "This is a joke," Preston spat. His voice was raw, desperate. You are playing some kind of sick legal joke. I demand you liquidate that holding company right this second. You dissolve Oak and Iron Holdings, and you cut me a check for my half of the $4.5 million. I am the eldest son. I am the primary beneficiary of this family. Mr. Abernathy did not flinch. He remained seated behind his crystal glass of water, his hands folded neatly over the thick stack of corporate documents. I cannot dissolve a corporate entity that belongs entirely to your sister, Mr. Dixon. The lawyer spoke with the slow, measured patience of a man explaining traffic laws to a reckless driver. The capital is shielded. It is secure. It belongs to Chloe. You have inherited exactly what your father explicitly directed in his standard will. You have the family home on Elm Street, the vintage cars, and the primary checking accounts. Preston slammed both of his fists down on the mahogany table. The impact rattled the silver letter opener. Fine. He screamed, spit flying from his lips. Fine. Keep your dirty corporate money, Chloe. I do not need it. I have the house. That property is easily worth $800,000 in this market. The vintage cars will fetch another $100,000. I have the physical assets. I will list the house this afternoon, sell it to the highest bidder by the end of the month, and I will be perfectly fine without you. I uncrossed my legs and reached into my worn leather tote bag. The room had gone quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the heating system above us. Preston was still standing still, trying to convince himself that the house and the cars were enough to rescue him. I removed a thick manila folder and set it on the table, but this time I did not toss it. I slid it slowly across the mahogany until it stopped directly in front of his hands. A bold heading was visible on the first page. Notice of Default and Foreclosure Rights. You should read that before you call your real estate agent, I said. Preston stared at the page. His face tightened. He knew exactly what the HELOC was. He had spent weeks pressuring our father to sign it. What he did not understand was why the loan was still standing between him and the money he believed the house would produce. He snatched up the notice and scanned the first paragraph. Why is this still attached to the house? Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. Because it is a secured home equity line of credit, Mr. Dixon. The principal balance is $300,000. It was recorded against the Elm Street property 1 year ago, and the lien remains attached to the property. Preston's eyes darted down the page. Dad was supposed to handle this. He did handle it, I said. He made the payments he could while he was alive. What he could not do was make the debt disappear. Preston looked at me sharply. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. You forced him to take out that line of credit. You called him over and over while his health was failing. You told him your business was on the edge of collapse. You told him you needed one more infusion of cash. He finally gave in because he was exhausted, and you spent the proceeds maintaining a lifestyle you could not afford. Chelsea's head turned toward her husband. Preston ignored her. That was a family loan. No, I said. It was a loan secured by the family house. He slapped the notice back onto the table. Then the estate pays it. The estate does not magically erase a recorded lien, Mr. Abernathy replied. The property passes subject to the secured debt. You insisted on receiving the house. The house comes with the encumbrances recorded against it. Preston's confidence flickered, but he clung to the one number he still wanted to believe. The property is worth $800,000. On paper before the debt stack is considered, I said. There is still the original mortgage, and there is the HELOC. The total secured obligations exceed the realistic value of the property. The house is underwater. He stared at me. For once he did the arithmetic before speaking. His lips parted. His eyes dropped to the foreclosure notice again. No. Yes. He turned to Mr. Abernathy. Tell her she is wrong. The lawyer did not soften his expression. She is not wrong. Preston dragged a hand over his mouth. Fine, then I refinance. You can try, I said, but you would be refinancing an underwater property while already carrying the financial history you brought into this room. The house is not a pile of cash waiting for you. It is collateral attached to obligations. He looked down at the second page and suddenly went still. At the bottom of the notice was the name of the current secured creditor, Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC. His head rose very slowly. What is this? Mr. Abernathy folded his hands. The municipal credit union that originated the HELOC later sold the loan. The debt and the associated lien rights were legally assigned to a corporate purchaser. Preston did not ask the next question immediately. I watched him fight against the answer already forming in his mind. Finally, he whispered, "Which purchaser?" Mr. Abernathy looked directly at him. "Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC." The sound Preston made was small and involuntary. I held his gaze. The LLC purchased the debt. The obligation did not vanish. The creditor changed. "You bought my house," he said. "No. Oak and Iron bought the secured debt attached to the house. You inherited the property subject to that debt. And because I own Oak and Iron, the payments you thought would disappear are now owed to the company I control." His fingers tightened around the foreclosure notice until the paper bent. "This is a setup." "It is a ledger," I said. "You created the debt. You demanded the property. I made sure the family was protected from the consequences." Preston stared at the creditor name again, as if another reading might produce a different answer. It did not. The same company he had dismissed as a meaningless shell now stood on both sides of his disaster. It held the wealth he could not touch, and it held the secured debt he could not wish away. His breathing changed. Until that moment, every problem in his life had been something he expected another person to absorb. A failed company became my father's emergency. An overdue bill became another request for seed money. A luxury expense became proof that his next venture had to succeed. Even the funeral had become my responsibility, because in Preston's mind the person willing to pay was the person obligated to pay. The foreclosure notice was different. It was a number that refused to become someone else's problem. He flattened the wrinkled page against the table with both palms. "How much do you want?" I looked at him. "The debt is not a ransom. Everything has a price. That belief is why you are sitting where you are." His face twisted. "Do not lecture me." "I am not lecturing you. I am telling you what the documents say." Mr. Abernathy spoke before Preston could interrupt again. "The notice states the default status, the secured balance, and the creditor's enforcement rights. Nothing has been invented this morning. Nothing became valid because Chloe walked into this office. These obligations already existed." Preston turned on him. "Then delay it. That is not my decision. Call whoever manages Oak and Iron." Mr. Abernathy glanced at me. The absurdity finally reached Preston. His eyes closed for half a second. I did not enjoy that moment as much as I once imagined I might. What I felt was something quieter and heavier. For years I had watched my father answer Preston's calls with the same exhausted hope. Maybe this request would be the last one. Maybe this business would finally stabilize. Maybe helping him one more time would turn him into the son he kept promising to become. Every concession had only taught Preston that consequences were negotiable. The papers in front of him were the first consequence he could not talk my father into absorbing. "You want me to beg," he said. "No." "You want me to apologize?" "No." "Then what do you want?" "I wanted you to leave our parents alone when they were sick. I wanted you to answer the phone when Dad was in surgery. I wanted you to contribute to their funeral instead of telling me that 10 years of caregiving counted as back rent. Those moments are over. I cannot buy them back, and neither can you." His jaw worked, but no answer came. "What I want now," I continued, "is for the documents to be honored exactly as they were signed." That sentence landed harder than shouting would have. Preston could argue with my feelings. He could mock my clothes, my career, my grief, and my choices. He could not make a recorded lien disappear because the truth embarrassed him. Chelsea had gone very still. Her attention was no longer on me. She was studying her husband with the cold concentration of someone recalculating an investment. She looked from the foreclosure notice to the standard will, from the standard will to Preston's face, and then back to the page carrying the $300,000 figure. The room changed again. Until that second, Preston and Chelsea had been a single force aimed across the table at me. Now a hairline crack had opened between them. Preston saw it too. "Chelsea," he said quickly, "this is manageable." She did not answer. "We have the cars," he added. "We have options." Mr. Abernathy did not comment. He did not need to. The numbers were already visible. Chelsea's eyes narrowed. "You told me the house was free and clear." Preston swallowed. And with that, the financial confrontation became the marital one. The outline of his own lies had been preparing all morning. "You did this to punish me. I did this because Dad knew what you would do if nobody put a wall between you and every asset he spent his life building." Preston shoved the notice away as if the paper itself had burned him. You orchestrated all of it, the LLC, the land, this loan. You wanted me to fail. I did not force you to ignore Dad's heart attack. I did not force you to pressure him for money. I did not force you to lock me out in the rain. I did not force you to walk into this office bragging about selling a house you had not even bothered to value after debt. I protected what Dad asked me to protect. You supplied everything else. The boardroom seemed to contract around him. A few minutes earlier, he had been demanding a wire transfer of $4.5 million. Now he was standing over a foreclosure notice tied to a house whose value could not cover what was secured against it. The assets he had treated like trophies were turning into obligations one page at a time. And for the first time that morning, Preston had nothing to say. Chelsea pushed past Preston and marched to the edge of the table. Her red-soled boots struck the hardwood with sharp, angry clicks. She planted both hands on the mahogany and stared at him. "What is she talking about, Preston? What $300,000 loan?" He flinched. "Chelsea, not right now. You told me your startup was funded by investors. You told me the cars, the apartment, all of it were covered. We can discuss this at home. We are discussing it here." Her voice had lost every trace of polished restraint. She looked from the foreclosure notice to the empty account summary and then back to her husband. The picture was becoming clear to her faster than Preston wanted it to. "Did you pressure your sick father to borrow against this house so you could keep pretending your company was successful?" "I borrowed money," he snapped. "I was going to pay it back when the business launched. You told me the business had already launched." Preston looked away. That silence did more damage than any accusation I could have made. Chelsea straightened slowly. "The house is underwater. The checking accounts are empty. The $4.5 million belongs to Chloe's company. What exactly do you have?" Preston pointed toward the estate papers as if they might still save him. "The classic cars. The classic cars are part of what you inherited," Mr. Abernathy said. "You may dispose of them subject to the ordinary estate transfer requirements. But even if they sell for what you hope, they do not change the secured debt on the house, and they do not give you any claim to oak and iron." Preston seized on the possibility anyway. "Then I sell them. I use the money to buy time." Chelsea stared at him. "Buy time for what? Another investor meeting, another business that is always 1 week away from becoming real." He reached for her arm. "I can fix this." She stepped back before he touched her. I watched the disgust move across her face. It was the same expression she had worn on the porch when she looked at my wet clothes in the mud. Only now it was aimed at the man beside her. "You lied to me," she said. "Chelsea. You lied about the money. You lied about the business. You lied about what you were inheriting. You let me stand in that house yesterday talking about renovations when you had no idea what was secured against it. I thought the debt would be handled in probate." "You thought," she said, almost laughing. "That is your entire life, Preston. You think you are the smartest person in every room, and then somebody else has to pay for what you never bothered to understand." His face twisted. "Do not take her side. I am taking my side." She snatched her designer handbag from the table and pulled the strap over her shoulder. Preston's panic became visible. "Where are you going?" "To call a divorce attorney." The words landed harder than his fists had landed on the table. "Chelsea, stop. No, I married a man who told me he had a future. What I have is a husband who financed an image with family debt and expected a dead man's estate to rescue him. We can file bankruptcy. We can restructure. Give me a few weeks. You have been asking everyone for a few weeks for years." She turned toward the doors. Preston moved after her. "Do not walk out on me." Chelsea stopped just long enough to look back. "You walked out on yourself a long time ago." Then she opened the double doors and left. The doors closed with a heavy thud. Preston stood in the center of the room, staring after her. The transformation was almost difficult to watch. The expensive suit was the same. The watch was the same. The leather shoes were the same. But without the certainty that money was about to rescue him, all of it looked like costume. He turned to me. "Chloe." I said nothing. He took one step closer. "Please, I am your brother." I looked at him and remembered the porch, the drill, the trash bag, the locked door. I remembered my father's empty hospital chair and the sound of jazz music through the phone while surgeons fought to keep him alive. Preston's voice dropped. "Release the lien. Let me sell the house. Give me a chance to start over. I picked up my tote bag and stood. I am not releasing the lien. His face tightened. As the creditor through oak and iron, I am enforcing the rights attached to the debt. The notice in front of you is not a threat I invented this morning. It is the consequence of a loan you insisted our father take out and then assumed would somehow disappear. Where am I supposed to live? I buttoned my coat. I expect the new brass keys to be on the foyer table by 5 o'clock Friday. If they are not there, I will begin the eviction proceedings set out in the notice. His eyes widened. You cannot do that. I looked directly at him. You were very certain yesterday that possession was everything. Now you are going to learn the difference between possession and control. He moved into my path. You are a monster. I stopped close enough that he could see I was not shaking. No, Preston. I am the accountant you spent 10 years underestimating. I stepped around him and walked toward the doors. Behind me, he began shouting again, first at me, then at Mr. Abernathy, then at the documents. I did not turn around. I pushed through the double doors, crossed the reception area, and walked to the elevator. When the doors slid shut, his voice disappeared. For the first time since our parents died, the silence felt like mine. 3 months later, I pushed a heavy metal shopping cart through the sliding glass doors of a discount retail store on the industrial side of the city. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed loudly above my head as I walked past aisles of cheap plastic goods and discounted cleaning supplies. I did not come here to shop for bargains. I came here to collect a debt. I steered my cart toward the front checkout lane, scanning the exhausted cashiers standing behind their registers. I found him at lane number 4. Preston was wearing a bright green polyester vest over a faded gray shirt. His custom-tailored Italian suits were completely gone, replaced by a uniform that required him to wear a plastic name tag. He held a heavy scanning gun in his right hand, slowly dragging barcodes across the red laser beam for a customer buying heavily discounted dog food and industrial paper towels. His shoulders were slumped, his posture completely defeated. I pushed my cart directly into his lane and waited patiently in line behind an elderly woman paying with loose coins. Preston did not look up when it was my turn. He reached for the single item in my cart, a small packet of gardening seeds, and dragged it across the scanner. The machine beeped loudly. That will be $1.49, he mumbled, staring blankly at the black rubber conveyor belt. I opened my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I placed it directly over the scanner, blocking the red laser. You are 3 days late on your interest payment, Preston, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Preston jerked his head up. His face went completely pale, mirroring the exact expression he wore in the lawyer's boardroom 3 months ago. He looked around frantically, checking to see if his shift manager was watching him from the front office. He reached a trembling hand into the pocket of his green polyester vest and pulled out a crumpled, damp paper check. He slid it across the metal counter toward me, refusing to meet my eyes. I am doing the best I can. Chloe, he whispered, his voice cracking with pure exhaustion. They cut my hours this week. I am working minimum wage here for 40 hours, and I took a night shift cleaning office buildings just to cover my grocery bills. You cannot demand more than I have. I picked up the crumpled check. I examined the amount, verifying it matched the mandatory minimum payment required by the commercial lien his house was tied to. I took a black pen from my bag, signed a printed receipt to acknowledge the payment, and handed the receipt back to him. Where are the luxury cars you were so proud of? I asked, sliding the check securely into my wallet. Preston gave a bitter laugh and looked past me toward the next register. Gone. Repossessed. Once everything collapsed, I could not keep up with the payments. The lenders took them back, and every image I built around myself went with them. I take the city bus now. That matched what I already knew. The repossessions had happened within weeks of the will reading. The luxury vehicles Preston used to signal success had never represented security. They represented monthly obligations. Once the inheritance he expected failed to materialize, the payments became impossible to hide behind promises. And Chelsea, his jaw tightened. She filed for divorce. He said it without drama, which told me the fight had already burned itself out. She left right after the will reading. She said she would not stay tied to my debts. Her attorney handled the rest. I looked at the green vest, the scuffed shoes, and the exhaustion around his eyes. Where are you living? A studio apartment at the edge of the city. The answer came quietly. The Elm Street house is gone. Oak and Iron completed the foreclosure after I failed to cure the default. I left the brass keys on the foyer table before the deadline because I knew you would follow through. I packed what I had left into black bags and walked out. The image should have felt triumphant. It did not. Justice is not always loud when it finally arrives. Sometimes it is simply the exact consequence a person insisted could never happen. Preston looked down at the conveyor belt. Every month I make the payment I can. Every month the balance reminds me what I did. You are paying the interest you owe, I said. I know. There was no apology in his voice, but there was no arrogance either. I picked up the packet of gardening seeds from the counter. The next payment is due on the 1st. He nodded. I did not threaten him. I did not need to. The documents had done what shouting never could. I turned and walked out through the sliding glass doors. My 12-year-old sedan was still parked outside. I had not replaced it with a luxury car, even though I could have. I liked the fact that it started every morning and was fully paid for. I drove from the industrial side of the city toward downtown, where the skyline reflected pale afternoon light off the office windows. 3 months had changed almost every visible part of my life, but I had been careful about what I allowed the money to change inside me. Oak and Iron still held the protected capital. I did not treat the $4.5 million sale as a prize to burn through. I treated it the way my father intended, as a foundation. I used a measured portion to establish my own independent accounting firm, one built around the work I understood better than I ever wanted to understand: elder care financial protection. The office was not enormous, and I did not want it to be. It was calm, organized, and practical. The reception area had comfortable chairs. The conference room had a long table large enough for families to spread out bank statements, deeds, loan documents, insurance records, and the paperwork that often becomes frightening when age or illness turns ordinary finances into a maze. On the wall behind my desk hung a simple sign with the name of the firm, Dixon Elder Financial Protection Services. For the first time in my career, I was not balancing payroll for someone else's company while caring for my parents between spreadsheets. I was building work around the skill my father trusted when he asked me to protect our family. I created the firm slowly. I reviewed every expense before approving it. I refused to rent a flashy address just to impress people. I did not fill the office with designer furniture. I invested in secure record systems, careful processes, and the kind of quiet organization that had saved my own parents' legacy. The point was not to perform success. The point was to make families safer before pressure, illness, or greed turned confusion into disaster. Every time I opened a new file, I remembered the brown leather briefcase on my father's hospital tray, the papers spilling across the metal surface, his weakened hand gripping my wrist. Build a fortress, he had told me. I finally understood that the fortress was never the LLC by itself. It was knowledge. It was documentation. It was refusing to let the loudest person in the family define reality. By 5 o'clock, I closed the office and drove toward the quiet outskirts of the city. The roads narrowed as the buildings gave way to trees. I passed through wrought iron gates and followed a curved driveway to the home I bought after the estate settled. It was a peaceful, single-story craftsman house on a broad piece of land bordered by tall pines. I chose it for one reason more than any other: the garden. My parents had talked about a garden for years. My mother wanted blue hydrangeas. My father wanted vegetables planted in straight, practical rows. There was always a reason to postpone it: a medical bill, a bad season, another request from Preston for money, another emergency that somehow became more important than the simple thing they wanted for themselves. I could not give them that garden while they were alive, so I built it now. I changed out of my work clothes, pulled on denim overalls and boots, and walked into the backyard with the packet of seeds I had bought at Preston's store. The irony was not lost on me, but I did not dwell on it. I knelt beside one of the raised cedar beds and pressed my fingers into the dark soil. Blue hydrangeas already lined the fence. Tomato vines climbed their supports. Basil filled the warm air with a sharp green scent when I brushed past it. Near the center of the yard stood a young oak tree, still thin enough to need support, but rooted firmly enough to survive the wind. I had planted it because the name Oak and Iron once sounded like a legal defense. Now it meant something else. Oak was patience, growth that took time. Iron was structure, the part that held when pressure came. I watered the bed slowly as the sun dropped behind the trees. The spray from the hose darkened the soil, and for a moment the sound reminded me of rain striking the motel window. Then I thought of the first storm instead, the freezing rain on the day Preston locked me out. Back then, he had the house and I had nowhere to sleep. Now I had a home chosen by me, a business built by me, and a future that did not depend on anyone recognizing my sacrifice. That was the part of the revenge that felt sweetest. Not Preston's uniform, not Chelsea's divorce filing, not the repossessed cars, not even the look on his face when Mr. Abernathy announced my net worth. It was the absence of fear. For years I had organized my life around other people's needs. Then after our parents died, Preston assumed I would organize my future around his decisions too. He thought throwing me into the rain made me powerless because he could not imagine power that did not look like a key in his hand. I was wrong. I stood in the garden until the last light faded and the leaves became dark shapes against the sky. I shut off the hose, wiped my hands on my overalls, and looked toward the warm windows of my house. For a decade, I was the invisible daughter who kept a broken family functioning. I was mocked for the work that made everyone else's life possible. I was treated as if care had no value because it did not come with a title anyone respected. But my father had seen me. He had trusted me with the one thing Preston never understood: stewardship. I protected what my parents built. Then I used that protection to build a life of my own. I learned that loyalty and blood are not the same thing. You cannot sacrifice your own future for people who only see you as a stepping stone. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there?